My friends and colleagues who have concerns about evolutionary theory for theological reasons are onto something. And one of them involves the fall, the nature of the fall, what it is. Even if it's a metaphor for something. And what's the something? And how would we make sense of that something in light of evolutionary theory? And the other issue, and this has been probably the most serious issue that not only Christians, but all theists who believe in a good and providential God have wrestled with. It's the problem of natural evil.
The problem of evil is a real problem for religious faith. It was certainly the thing for Darwin himself. That's what made him question his faith. And I think rightly so. It does not look like the sort of system that a good and loving and benevolent God would have set up. Now, obviously that raises huge questions because we don't see any evidence of a world that was harmonious. We only see evidence of a world that was at war with itself. And that's obviously the problem that Christian theologians face. For a long time, I used to believe that the Genesis narratives paint a picture of a world completely at peace, completely harmonious, until the human fall and then something goes wrong. When I began to look at it more closely, I began to think, actually there's more to it than that. There's evidence from the text that things are already dislocated, already out of joint. For one thing, there's the serpent, and however you interpret the serpent, here is a bit of the created order that is actively talking against God, working against God. So there's already something that's gone wrong. Secondly, there's the command to fill the earth and subdue it. Some suggestion that there's something that needs to be subdued, there's something that isn't right, that needs to be put right, and that human beings are called to do that, to put it right. And thirdly, it's a garden. It's almost as if God has said, right, here's a little bit I've done for you, here's a little bit of order and harmony that I've done for you. Now you go and spread that order and that harmony throughout the rest of creation. And the tragedy, of course, is that human beings don't do that. Rather than put that right, they make it worse.
Clearly, Scripture distinguishes humanity from the rest of creation by this idea of the image of God. And that's understood in a number of ways, one of them is which is relational. Human beings have this God-given capacity to be able to relate to God, which is simply not there for the rest of creation. How do we understand that phrase, the image of God, if we accept a narrative of biological evolution? We have to say that at some point, humanity became sufficiently distinguished from the rest of the natural world to be able to have this relationship with God.
If you have a very finely graded gas tap and you begin to turn it on, initially there's not enough gas in the air for the gas to ignite. So you turn it up a bit more, still nothing, a bit more, still nothing, a bit more, still nothing. At a particular point, there will be enough gas to air ratio for the thing to ignite. So you can have a completely smooth development, upward development, and yet you can have something decisive happening at a particular moment. You get an increase in their moral capacity, their moral awareness. You get an increase in their relational ability and their social ability. You get an increase in their tool-making ability. You get an increase in their language. At a particular point, there's enough of all that. There's enough relational capacity. There's enough social capacity and moral awareness and spiritual awareness for God to deal with us in a new way. They have enough creativity to reflect the fact that I'm the creator. They have enough relational capacity to reflect the fact that I'm love. This, in some way, reflects who I am. I will stack my image upon them.
As hominids evolved, became more complex, then self-consciousness, in the sense of projecting our minds into the remote future or past, began to dawn in them. And that didn't bring biological death into the world, because obviously it had been there for millions of years beforehand, but it brought into the world what you might call mortality. Because our ancestors were self-conscious, they knew they were going to die. But because they turned away from God, they had alienated themselves from the only one, I think, who is the ground of the hope of a destiny beyond death. And so mortality, meaning the sadness, human sadness of transience and decay, dawned in human life. Another very subtle feature of the Genesis 3 story is that it's a fall upward, as people sometimes say. It's the gaining of some knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil, the story says. And so the dawning of self-consciousness was also the gaining of something that wasn't there before. What the serpent whispers in Eve's ear is, you eat this fruit and you'll be like God. You won't need God anymore. You can do it yourself. That's the fundamental sin, the fundamental mistake in human life, is believing that we can do it on our own, doing it my way. And spiritual death is to deliberately and persistently cut yourself off from that. It doesn't occur as an angry God giving you a punishment for not falling into line. It's simply that you have punished yourself. You know, preachers sometimes say the gates of hell are locked on the inside, not to keep the creatures in, but to keep God out. And that I think is, in the end, is what spiritual death is. If you persist in it, but of course God is always, I'm sure, at work, seeking to draw people back into the divine love. And I think that does the work that's necessary to understand what Paul's getting at in Romans 5 when he says that death came into the world through one man. The cost of development is a degree of precariousness. We're people who need the grace of God if we're truly to live fulfilling lives.